Good evening and welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. My name is Dave Schrader. I'm your host. Across the board from me, as he is every night, Mr. Tim Dennis. We want to thank Nancy and Brent from sspirits.com for coming on to share their story about the Seven Sisters Inn. Great story, interesting stuff. And again, you can get some more information by going to sevensistersinn.com to learn more about the hotel. And if you're interested in going there to do a private ghost hunt yourself, you can do that or be a part of their event coming up on November 21st and 22nd. You can also check out sevensistershaunt.com, sevensistershaunt.com, and spell it out sevensistershaunt. I'm excited to get into this next guest. Everybody's always busting my chops for saying we don't talk enough on the skeptical side of things, bringing in the scientific measure. We just talked to the people out there in the field ghost hunting. So I went out in search and found probably one of the best people I think in this field to talk to about that part of the paranormal investigations. He's been called the modern-day Sherlock Holmes and a real-life Scully. He's well into his fourth decade as an investigator of historical, paranormal, and forensic mysteries, myths, and hoaxes. And in contrast to the mystery mongers on one hand and the so-called debunkers on the other, he believes that mysteries should actually be investigated with a view towards solving them. So welcome for the first time on the Darkness on the Edge of Town, Joe Nickell. Good evening, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us here this evening. I want to talk to you about some of the different things that are going on in the world of the paranormal, and I know that you've been involved in so much, in investigating so many things, including a lot of forgeries. One thing that popped up on your bio that I was interested in, it said that you exposed many forgeries, including the notorious Jack the Ripper diary, which you authenticated. Now, I'm curious. Now, this is something I wasn't even familiar about. What was the story of the Jack the Ripper diary? Is it supposedly a diary found that they believed he was documenting his kills, and then you were able to...
That's right. It's the subject of a book. At the time, it was a book to be published by Time Warner. And at the last minute, Time Warner decided maybe they ought to have it authenticated. So they contacted the document expert Kenneth Rendell, who was on Newsweek's team for the Hitler Diaries. Mm-hmm. And Ken enlisted me. I put together a forensic team and secretly rented a forensic laboratory in Chicago, while meanwhile lawyers got the diary insured for $1 million and summoned the guy who had it over here. He was not a happy camper. And we had a day to go over it and take photographs and ink samples and so forth, and then we studied it extensively, but... Ken and I, as soon as we opened the book really and saw it, just a few moments of the handwriting, knew it was not an authentic handwriting of the 1880s, and it went downhill from there.
Was it? Did it give it away because of the penmanship itself, the paper, the ink?
Yeah, the penmanship was not a consistent penmanship and not a penmanship of the period by any stretch of anyone's imagination who knew handwriting. Of course, if you're ignorant of handwriting, it would have looked fine.
Okay.
We filed a report with Time Warner, and they withdrew publication, but a Disney publisher published it anyway and put in our report and then tried to rebut it afterwards. The usual stuff that if you start with the answer, you can always look for evidence that'll fit that.
Sure.
But that's not how science works. Science, and we had, of course, real forensic scientists as opposed to, conspiracy theorist wannabes. And, of course, eventually the guy did confess and then later took back his confessions. I guess you can decide, kind of whether you want to believe something. But there's no question it is absolutely a forgery. And
now, did the book name who they thought Jack the Ripper was, or was it just Dear Diary?
Well, this was
Signed Jack.
A confession of one James Maybrick that he was Jack the Ripper, and I think the diarist thought that he could, type out some pseudo Jack the Ripperish diary stuff on his computer, fake up a diary by getting an old blank book of the period. Actually, the book he got was a scrapbook. It had some pages partly used, and he cut those out with a knife and presumed that the diary began in mid-sentence. This is suspicious as soon as you see this sort of thing. But it gave him some paper. He got a Victorian replica ink, and he thought he could just use any old handwriting because nobody would know. I mean, there's real incompetence, in other words. That got this far is just incredible, but he thought he could just make up a handwriting. It turned out they're actual specimens of James Maybrick's handwriting.
Well, you want to count on science, I guess.
So not only was it not an authentic handwriting of the period, failing once, it wasn't James Maybrick's handwriting, failing twice, and although it used phrases and so forth similar to the fake Jack the Ripper, postcards and stuff of the era, that's where we got the name Jack the Ripper. These are almost certainly not from the real killer, but from people looking for attention.
Right.
It also failed to match the handwriting, so it
now,
pretty much was much ado about nothing. But as I say, there's still diehards who, sort of like the diehards for the Shroud of Turin, showing the wonders of if you adopt a dogma, just embrace it with your heart, and are very stubborn. Nobody can prove anything to you.
Well, and I agree with that. I think that's part of the strange, there's a difference between being a skeptic and a cynic. Cynics, I don't know, in your opinion, I think Jesus Christ could walk in the room.
I absolutely agree with you there. I am a skeptic. I am not a cynic. I'm in fact, I like to point out, a sensitive romantic poet. And a humanist.
Sure. And
a person with values, and I believe in humanity. Skeptic to me means someone who, in proportion to how far-fetched something is, says, well, let's doubt this some. Let's doubt that a whole lot.
Right.
Let's doubt that exceedingly.
Well,
Until we have some real evidence.
Now, right now, Mr. Nickell, there is a glut of paranormal TV shows, books, magazines, radio shows that are popping up all over, covering every aspect of the paranormal. And one thing that Tim and I run into, we host live events all over the United States to go out and hopefully try to educate people a little bit more to make some sense of what they're doing so that they're only, aspect of the paranormal is not just watching it on TV. It's getting in the field and actually learning from people that are in the field and looking at this responsibly of how to do what they do and try to cull the junk away from getting into the real evidence of an investigation. Why do you think, from a scientific standpoint, why do you think that there's such a huge rise again in paranormal fandom and such an intrigue for people to want to get into this and understand it so much?
Well, it's a complicated question, but I'll suggest some answers. I think, first of all, one of the secrets of the paranormal is that almost all of the paranormal promises something rather big. If ghosts are real, then we don't really die. If extraterrestrials are true, and if they're visiting the planet Earth, and we know they exist, well, then we are not alone in the universe. And guardian angels, why, heck, they're looking down on us, and who doesn't want to be protected?
Right.
And fortune tellers and soothsayers could give us an edge on our future, which we are all apprehensive about. And so almost all of the paranormal, think of an exception or two if you like, but I think almost all of the paranormal either promises something really big and appeals to our very human hopes. And I have these feelings too. I remember when my grandmother died and how much I didn't want that to be the case. So these are big issues. And then on the other hand, there are not only our hopes but our fears. We're fearful that we may have an illness, and we may actually have an illness, and the doctors have given up hope, so we head for a healing shrine or a quack doctor. Or there's some boogeyman like spontaneous human combustion, which I've done a lot of work on that subject. So we're afraid maybe we'll be stricken. Or
well, you mentioned that finding the medical people, the as you were saying, like kind of hoaxers that claim medical centers that can cure you. What about the success stories that do come out of there? And if people are, even if I go in there racked with cancer and come out no cancer free, do you dismiss that we understand that the body is an amazing thing, and that certainly intent and your way you approach things can affect the way your body responds to healing.
Well, exactly.
But isn't that, in a sense, kind of a paranormal nature, that if you could turn around this disease that's metastasized inside you and is killing you and, in effect, destroying your body, and you're able to flip that around, isn't that a bit on the paranormal realm as well?
Well, here's where you have to be careful,
mm-hmm.
because you can't just start with that belief. You've just expressed a belief, pretty much.
Right.
And then you say, well, let's look around and see if we have some evidence for it. Well, you will find evidence for it. Yes, you will. And when you find maybe a greater amount of evidence against it, you just ignore that. Or, well, their faith wasn't strong enough, or
right.
It doesn't work in every case, or what have you. I mean, look at a place like Lourdes. Around since the middle of the 19th century, this great Catholic healing shrine, and the number of church-sanctioned miracles is still in the 60s. That is, fewer than 70 people. Whereas millions go there each year and have done so since, or huge numbers anyway, since the middle of the 19th century. Now, this would be an abysmal record. This is hugely a failure. And yet we keep having people trot out these handful of miracles as if, wow, look at this. No, let's look at the failure rate.
Right, but isn't there a specific type of thing that they look for in order to call it a miracle? It might not.
They've got a dogma, you see, and
right.
they've got people whose job it is to prove it's a miracle. And you look at now, how do they establish that it's a miracle? Well, I'll tell you. And this is the problem with so much of the paranormal, including the ghost hunter types and everybody else, the flying saucer people. Here's another secret of the paranormal.
Well, I'll tell you what. Hold on to that secret. We have to take a quick break. Come back, and then you can enlighten us in on that, okay?
All right.
All right. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Good evening. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Our guest this evening is Joe Nickell. And, Joe, before we went to break, you were kind of teasing us with kind of the secret of this. What can you enlighten us with?
Well, one of the secrets of the paranormal is that what we're really dealing with over and over and over is not positive evidence for these many things. We don't actually have a captured UFO. The ghost hunters haven't actually found a ghost. I use ghost hunters, with a small GH,
right?
Meaning all of their types, and so on. Because what they're really doing is they're engaging across the board of the paranormal. Now, I'm generalizing, but this is hugely the case. They are engaging in a logical fallacy. In Latin, it's called argumentum ad ignorantium. That is, it's arguing from ignorance. Now, I'm not name-calling. I'm not referring to people as ignorant. It means arguing from an admitted lack of knowledge. Here's how it works. You can't say, to go back to Lourdes, we don't know why the person's cancer went into remission. Doctors are mystified.
Right.
Therefore, it's a miracle of the Holy Virgin Mary. Nope, wait, stop. Can't do it. Can't say I don't know, therefore I do know. This is the construct. Very easy to apply over and over and over. It's fallacious logic, not admissible, but it's the secret behind so much of the paranormal.
Well, people want to compartmentalize. They want an answer or a silver bullet to the issue. So
take another issue.
Right.
Ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know at McKenzie House what caused the noise of the footsteps on the stairs. No one in the house locked. Quite mysterious. We don't know. No one can explain it. Therefore, it's a ghost. Nope, stop. Argumentum ad ignorantium. Wait, can't do it. Or again, we don't know what the bright light in the sky was. gee, it looked incredible. No one seems to know what it was. Therefore, it's extraterrestrial craft. Nope. Once again, argumentum ad ignorantium. If I could teach would-be paranormal investigators to simply understand that concept and stop that, it would just hugely stop great amounts of nonsense. Of course, it would end entire television series.
Sure.
It would throw a monkey wrench into book publishing. It would disconcert tens of thousands of otherwise happy believers. But look, we have to talk real evidence if we're going to talk about the paranormal in any way other than faith, belief. I believe this. Do you believe this? And this kind of litany of cases that are meant, oh, you can debunk that one or this one. Well, what about this next one or 2 or 10 or 20?
Well, let me go back when you're saying like with the house, with the footsteps. Okay. So we don't know what it is, granted. Mm-hmm. Do we call it a ghost? Do we call what would you, as a scientist, what would you refer to the phenomena that occurred?
Well, here's the problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm referring to a real haunted house, the McKenzie House in Toronto.
Right.
And I'm going back to 1972, 73.
Okay.
And in fact, there was just such a case, and you don't get anywhere by simply trying to label something if you don't know what it is. So we have to be prepared, if we really don't know, to do one of two things. We have to, in all honesty, admit, I just don't know. We won't know the answer to everything. Science doesn't know everything. But the people who tell you they do know, if all they're doing is arguing from ignorance or pulling rabbits out of hats, are not being helpful. Well, they're just misinforming themselves.
Let me ask your advice on this.
At the same time, if we can, by not knowing, if we can spend more time on the issue, which is what I chose to do at McKenzie House. Mm-hmm. Simply reading from an armchair that people couldn't understand the phenomenon and lumping it with a lot more phenomena, someone waking up at night and seeing a ghostly figure in a frock coat, a photograph with a misty spot in it, the kinds of usual ghost huntery stuff collected together. Surely if one of these pieces isn't a ghost, maybe the next 2 or 3 are. When you have lots and lots and lots of pieces of evidence like this, my goodness, you must be proving the reality of ghosts. No, all you're doing is you're establishing a quantity of it, and quantity isn't quality if no piece of it is worth a damn. So all you have to do is look further. So what did I do? Well, I went to McKenzie House. I went there. And I didn't go there with silly ghost hunting equipment bought from Radio Shack, the use of which has never detected a single ghost and apparently isn't going to, and being wielded by people who absolutely are incompetent as to the science behind electromagnetism, for example. So what I did was not this, just move aside, folks, we ghost hunters have come in here, just step aside while we bring in our scientific equipment. It's
right.
Sort of silly process. What I did was to go and say, well, now, why do you think this place is haunted? What exactly? What are the mysteries? They're irrelevant. We're just going to bring in our equipment. No, I have no reason to bring any equipment in. None of this has been proven to detect any ghosts. So what I did was to go and say, well, now, this phenomenon of waking up at night is well understood. This is what's called a waking dream. One wakes into the state between being fully awake and fully asleep. It's very well understood. I work with a neurologist from Yale, and we know all about hypnagogic and hypnopompic. Not all about, but we know enough to recognize these when people describe having woken up and seen something strange. So then we look at the other phenomena, and so I'm looking for an explanation for the footsteps on the stairs. And a tour guide there, because by then the place no longer had people spending the night, caretakers and so forth, but was now a historic house with just open during the days. And I got a hold of a tour guide who said to me, this is just wonderful. She said, you know, sir, I think I heard those footsteps once during the day. Now, generally, they were being heard late at night when the place was really quiet outside. During the day in Toronto, it's a bustling metropolis with noisy streetcars and
right.
what have you. But she had been right at the staircase and heard the sound of heavy thudding footsteps, and she got her ear against the wall, and she said to me, you know, sir, I think there's a staircase next door. Now, would you believe that all this phenomena had gone on for some 10 years before I arrived, had been the subject of books by Susie Smith and exorcisms and all-night stands by reporters, often activity around Halloween time? Would you believe that? And
sure.
Nobody had bothered ever to go next door? Can you believe that?
I do. I've seen people investigate like that myself.
Well, how could this be? So I go next door, and lo, 40 inches away is the building. And there is the parallel iron staircase and a caretaker's family, late-night cleanup crew, and so on. I mean, I won't go through all the phenomena, but reliably, much of it was coming from the building next door. And I asked the caretaker next door, I said, why didn't you come forward? He said, well, he didn't feel it was his responsibility to rain on other people's parade, but he had said to himself that if someone came and asked him, that he would tell them what he thought. And I said, no one ever did? No. He said, you're the first one.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing to me. And
I agree. Well, people have a want, and they want to believe what they want to believe, and it is. I think if that's where the irresponsibility is on a lot of the investigators. I do believe you have to break down everything that you're doing to actually investigate the area and investigate the stories of the people in the area and ask the questions instead of just listening to the ghost stories and then taking it from there. We do have to take another quick break. We'll be right back with more with Joe Nickell. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Good evening. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Hey, come on out and meet Tim and I. We're going to be out at the 3rd annual Crypticon taking place November 14th, 15th, and 16th at the Radisson in Roseville, Minnesota. It's great. There's going to be a bunch of great horror movie stars and icons there. You can come out, get their autographs, get your pictures taken with them. Great information. Just go to their website at Crypticon Minneapolis. Again, that's CRYPTICON Minneapolis.com. Tim and I will be out there. You can come on out, say hi, shake hands with us, and get to meet the lovely Kelly Maroney, who will be sitting with us at the table. She's from the movie Chopping Mall, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and the cult classic Night of the Comet. For more information, again, check out the website at CrypticonMinneapolis.com. We're going to go back to our guest. Joe Nickell is on the line with us. Joe, we've got segments go really fast here. We appreciate you spending some time. I wanted to get your opinion. Now, I agree with you on the most part with people out there that are doing investigations that are not within the know and they don't understand what they're looking at and they don't have the scientific background. What do you make of claims from people like Story Musgrove, Buzz Aldrin, John Glenn, who know what things are in space, understand what these things are, understand the functioning of the units that they flew to get to the moon, and yet they come out on the record saying there were UFOs, there were things flying in the sky following us. We have video and photographic evidence of what we believe to be UFO and craft.
Right.
How do you debunk that type of thing?
Well, let me emphasize again that I'm not in the business of debunking. I mean, that's not my motive. I think it's just as wrong to set out to mystery monger or to debunk.
Mm-hmm.
I think an attitude. This is the problem that I see with most of the people approaching the paranormal, and I'm referring to both sides. Those who are simply collecting hopefully more and more evidence of ghosts or UFOs or whatever, and they're really not solving anything. They're just collecting lots and lots of mysteries. And I call them mystery mongers. They're not investigators because they're not solving anything. They're collecting. They're collecting mysteries. And the other type are the debunkers and dismissers. I'm accused of this occasionally, but anyone who actually knows my work and has read my many books knows that I actually have been out there,
Gotcha.
searching the lakes and the lochs with National Geographic or Monster Quest looking for the lake serpents, and I've been in the haunted houses, more haunted houses than Casper, and so on. I'm actually trying to explain phenomena, actually solve mysteries and explain them. It is a very different approach. I am not starting with the answer, trying to work backward to the evidence, but I'm actually taking the forensic approach as if we would go to a crime scene, starting with evidence, trying to find good evidence, and then seeing where that will lead and believe that.
Well, do you think that that's good evidence when people that are of a scientific nature and background and know what they're dealing with are there in the atmosphere at the moment and they're experiencing?
Maybe not. Maybe not. Here's the problem.
Okay.
What you've presented to me is now two logical fallacies. And so if we've got two, it's supposed to be twice as good, but it's maybe twice as bad. One's an argument from authority. If a guy's got some credentials, he couldn't be wrong no matter how much he's in a minority of the scientific community. And the other one is the old argument from ignorance. We've seen over and over how experienced pilots are not very good observers either. In fact, there have actually been studies by and some ufologists will agree with this. There have been some studies that show that airplane pilots aren't very good observers either. They may know certain known things very, very well, but when something happens that catches them off guard and is beyond their immediate sphere of understanding, they may be no better than you or I. Let me give you two quick examples. One is the Mantell incident of the last half of the 1940s. I forget, 47 or 48, somewhere in there, the Mantell incident, in which the pilot, Mantell, near Fort Knox, was chasing a UFO, and he didn't know what it was. It's unidentified. And he went off into the wild blue yonder, and his plane was at that time not equipped with oxygen. He passed out. Soon he's found his plane has crashed. He's decapitated, and we had all these stories about how he was shot down by a flying saucer. And we had all kinds of people. He didn't know what it was, an experienced pilot. Others didn't know what it was. Nobody could figure out what it was. So does that prove that this was an extraterrestrial craft? I mean, huge amounts of ink spent on this mystery. Well, now we do know. We know that he was chasing a skyhook balloon. And you can read his description of it and look at pictures of a skyhook balloon and be pretty convinced. If you need more evidence, it could be proven now, because it was then classified secret, that there was a skyhook balloon right where he was. So it looked like a skyhook balloon, and there was a skyhook balloon there. And so, in fact, someone tracking it further on later, I believe, saw it through a telescope and identified it as some sort of balloon. But it was classified, so we didn't get the full story. And so it was unidentified. And once again, you see, we have these words like unidentified, unexplained, mysterious, unknown. This is mystery-mongering stuff. So we didn't know what it was. Well, but the least likely explanation always was that it was an extraterrestrial craft, because we have no evidence that there's a single one of those. So, yeah, we didn't know what it was, but we identify most UFOs, 90-some% or so. My ufologist friends would say, we identify maybe 95% or more.
Right, I agree with that.
Some of them 2%ers. And they're thinking that the 2% proves that these are the real extraterrestrial craft or something. And I'm suggesting that those are just ones that, if we knew what the answer was, they would fall into the same percentage as the others, as, meteors, secret balloon projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Another example was a couple of helicopter pilots. This was back in the 80s over Louisville, Kentucky. A couple of police helicopter pilots. And they were on a routine patrol very late one evening, and they were engaged by a fiery UFO. It frightened the dickens out of them. They took evasive actions. It appeared to shoot fireballs at them. frightened them quite a bit more, and they eventually zoomed up and away and got out of contact with it, and they did not know what they had seen. Therefore, UFO. Well, yes, it is a UFO. And if I didn't tell you what it was, it would seem very mysterious. I mean, it seemed mysterious to me. I didn't know what it was. Do you have any idea right off?
Nope.
And this is the problem.
But then you run into people like Jesse Marcel, who was at the first government official on the site of the Roswell crash, whose job it was, and knew what the mogul balloons looked like, and knew what this, and there was a difference between the metal that he claimed to find.
We can go into Roswell if you want, but I think it's a losing battle for the believers. Roswell is just devastatingly not going to be the Holy Grail they want. But here's this helicopter, and in fact, it turns out that just before the helicopter got to the area, a young graduate student named Scott Heacock had sent up a little small hot air balloon made out of a garment bag and some balsa sticks and some ever-lighting candles, and it had just cleared the tree line when the helicopter got there, and whoops. And now you know the rest of the story. Oh, but wait a minute, that's not what they described. Right. People who are excited, even experienced helicopter pilots or experienced airplane pilots like the Mantell, when they don't know what they're seeing because it's something they've never seen before, don't know what they're seeing. So how credible they are and so forth doesn't really matter. And, when Marcel talks about...
then that comes across even more cynical than skeptic, because it should matter when there are people that are in the know and understand. How would we ever...
I've just given you two cases.
All right. Well, I understand that. But
where they were absolutely unidentified, and if I did not tell you the answer, or if somebody had not given the answer, these would be cited in the canon of great UFO mysteries.
Right, but just like the Roswell incident, where we
still wouldn't have a single...
Joe, are you going to let me talk for a second?
Nutter bolt from a flying saucer.
Okay. But the thing is that with the Roswell incident even, it was convenient how the general, how Jesse Marcel and others saw this, knew what it was, that it was what they called UFO, that it was not of their issue. The information that was brought to the student, they said, go ahead and release this press release that this is what we found. And then they should know the difference between a metal from a UFO and aluminum foil and balsa wood that they were claiming to hold up.
Look, you're dealing with years later. You're dealing with years later in which the folklore and the fake lore has taken on a life of its own, and in which people have had enough time. I mean, these are well-known processes to psychologists who I work with and folklorists who I work with. Well-known processes of confabulation. And what you can do with Roswell is you can go back to the very time in which Mac Brazel, I've been to Mac Brazel's deserted ranch home. I've been all over Roswell. I've researched this. I've talked to Charlie Moore from Project Mogul. I mean, I haven't just sat in my armchair somewhere and read Stanton Friedman's nonsense or any of these other books that are full of misinformation and fantasy and the reminiscences of old men. And I can tell you that Mac Brazel, you can read the newspapers oneself and see when Mac Brazel came into town, he described the wreckage as being very lightweight, a few pounds at most, hauled it into the kitchen table and tried to piece some of it together. And it's described in some length. I urge people to read this. He described foiled paper, sticks.
Let's have you cover the rest of that in a second. We will give you time to wrap that up. I got to take our last break here for the hour. We'll be right back. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Well, the show's going by fast on us quick. I'm really appreciative for all of you tuning in and spending your time with us this evening. I'm really thankful for Joe Nickell joining us here on the show. You were saying we had to cut you short as we went to commercial break, but you were giving me the last bits of information of what Mac had described that he found at the crash site.
Right. Just to wrap it up a bit, from my perspective, so Brazel described foiled paper, sticks, tape, and rubber, and I've read those accounts. They can still be read from the archives in the newspaper, the Roswell Daily Record newspaper. And you say what you will, that sounds like, I mean, I try this out on audiences just frequently. Does it sound to you like an extraterrestrial craft, or does it sound more like balloons and a sort of box kite? And they'll opt for the latter every time, unless they're UFO buffs, because that's what it sounds like. And we now know that Project Mogul had lost a balloon in the direction of the Brazel Ranch. And in any case, it's...
But isn't that fitting evidence to fit your story? Is that if the government truly is covering up, how convenient that, there just happens to be a balloon that was lost in that area.
Yeah, but you can't. See, what you just did with that is you just stepped outside all of the evidence and invoked no matter how much your evidence looks like one direction, I'm just going to insist that it's been faked, and this is exactly.
But my point is, I have a hard time understanding that.
Theorist does
right, but it's hard to believe that the people that were there on site at the time, that were government officials, didn't know that it was a balloon, and that he even went all the way up to the general who said, release this press release.
But they did. I mean, except for one or two men who are telling you this decades later. We have Mac Brazel, who found the wreckage, describing the rubber and foiled paper, describing it right then and there. And then we have the people, the Fort Worth Telegram's photographs of wreckage that looks just exactly like that. And Charlie Moore has looked at it and has said that looks like that's consistent with debris from Project Mogul. So I have very good evidence. And the fact that people's memory later is different, I've learned from the experience of dealing with people that people misremember hugely, and that their story changes year by year by year and gets better and more exaggerated. Folklorists know this process very well. So if all they've got is that they're trying to convince us that somehow Mac Brazel was lying, if Brazel was lying, why did he even come into town and report this if they got to him that early? It doesn't wash. He didn't know what he had found. He came into town well-meaning and well-intentioned. It looked odd to him. Here was some debris. Sure enough, the debris he described is just what the photographs show, and all of that is consistent with a missing Mogul balloon. It has to be. It's an article of faith, very much like what people do with the Shroud of Turin, who stubbornly decide that this is the shroud of our Lord, and I'm not going to hear Joe Nickell or anybody else tell me otherwise, and you just give me the evidence, and I'll just turn it around because I've got somebody who will say the opposite.
Let's talk about
not how we do it.
Right. Let's talk. I want to talk about something else. I also have to make a quick mention that the Twilight Tour is coming to Minneapolis. You've read the books. You can't wait for the movie. You want to meet the cast. Of course you do. We've got Jacob, Victoria, and Laurent are coming to Minneapolis November 14th at Hot Topic at the Mall of America from a 3 to 5 p.m. signing and a Q&A at Hot Topic. To get an autograph, you must have a wristband. Get your wristband while supplies last when you buy the special Twilight Tour T-shirt at Hot Topic. They're available beginning that Friday morning, the 14th, the day of the event. Visit mallofamerica.com for more details or visit hottopic.com. We've got about 4.5 minutes left here. I wanted to touch base with you. There's a show that was just on the Sci-Fi Channel called The Real Exorcist that starred, and I hate to use that term, but featured Reverend Bob Larson. And I saw an interesting interview that you were able to do with him and talking about exorcisms and things like that. What's your take on exorcisms and the show specifically?
Well, I'm really astonished that in the United States of America in the 21st century that anybody is talking about devils and demons, that anybody's doing that. I mean, it's just certainly as an explanation for any kind of mental problems that people have. And Bob Larson is I've tracked his career quite a bit, and he's had people who simply have a problem, like maybe they're having some marriage problem, or they're having some compulsive behavior or something. Everything from something that a psychologist could deal with to schizophrenia to any of a number of mental states or possibly neurological problems. But modern science knows how to deal with these phenomena and recognize them. And yes, somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer is a mystery of a sort as to his background and his compulsive nature and so forth. But the scientific explanations that we have from the experience of the sciences dealing with the human mind is just far, far, far superior than this approach of the boogeyman of the devil's gotcha, and no evidence whatsoever for that paradigm. I mean, that there are devils or demons who possess people is absurd. What he's doing, and I've studied him very carefully, he's doing almost exactly the same thing that Benny Hinn and Peter Popoff, and let me say, I've gone undercover and in disguise to most of these services and places, limping in painfully with a cane and so forth, been healed many times. When Benny Hinn gets you up and touches you or points at you and you fall under the power, it's very similar to when Bob Larson stares you in the eyes and you slump and kick and thrash and are possessed by the devil. Some of the actions are almost identically the same, and yet one is the force of God and the power of the Holy Spirit, and the other one's the force of the devil, the opposite effect and very negative. In fact, both of those are very, very similar to what stage hypnotists do. Mm-hmm. All of these processes are selecting people first. You or I may not be able to play along with this at all, but they pick people who are buyers into this to start with, and then through the power of suggestion and the ability of people, their expectations that they should role play, they role play. How are you supposed to act when you come to believe that you're possessed by the devil? Well, you talk in a guttural voice or something. And that's all Bob Larson is doing. And he gets defensive and says, well, what harm does it do? Well, that's a separate issue whether we want to say the end justifies the means there. I think it doesn't. I think it does a great deal of harm when we sell medieval superstition over science.
No doubt.
I think that's hugely a problem.
Well, we got to cut it short here, Mr. Nickell. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. How can people read about you and get more of your information? Where can they find more information on you?
Well, they can find more on our website, www.csicop.org, or my personal website, joenickell.com, and that's Nickell. And if your listeners want a free copy of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine, which I work for, they can call 1-800-634-1610 and tell them they're a friend of mine and see if they can't persuade them to send out a free magazine.
They'll just say, I'm skeptical that you're friends with Joe Nickell. We're not sending it out. But, Joe, thanks a lot for spending time with us this evening and sharing your insight. We'd love to have you back on and talk more in depth about different topics as we go along. And I'd even love to have you come on and debate with some of the different people that we host.
Well, debates don't clarify much. But
no, but I'd like to have you address the other sides of these issues on some of them, so that would be great for us if you're interested. But keep in touch, and we'll certainly look forward to talking to you again in the future.
You bet.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. And thank you all for tuning into the show. We appreciate you spending your Saturday and Sunday nights here with us. We're on every Saturday and Sunday night from 9 to midnight right here on Darkness Radio. You can tune us in and check out our website to find out all of our past shows. Check them out on podcast form there as well. We appreciate your time. We'll be back again with you next week with brand new shows right here on the home for the best in paranormal talk radio,